Good morning and welcome to Waymaker Fellowship for our weekly Bible study. Last week, I presented that there are four Greek words for the English word love. And we spent time talking about agape and philo and stugio and eros. And we learned together that agape, God's love, covers the three other words for love, which are relational, family type love, and romantic type love. And that when God agape covers it, then we move in it according to God's will, God's ways, and God's truth. So this morning, we're going to be talking about compassion. We hear it many times in our society. Many times there will be commercials that will come on TV and will move our hearts. Or maybe you're watching a movie about a person and you come to tears. Or maybe it's about an animal and it comes to tears. I know there have been times in my pastorate through the years that people have come to me in my office and said, Pastor, I just don't weep before the Lord. And so one of the things I'm going to declare today is that compassion is the outworking of God's love. If you say that you are a Christian, a born-again believer, that you are following Christ, then you have to acknowledge that compassion is there. Because if agape love is there, and agape love is demonstrated by a choice and demonstrated by a commitment, then the emotional aspect of it is going to be found in that word compassion. In fact, compassion is at the very heart of the God that we love, the Father above. Throughout scriptures, we see his deep love and mercy demonstrated over and over and over again. We even see the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. And so my question today for you and I is how compassionate are we? And to that question will come, how much do we love our community at large, our families, our friends, our co-workers? One of the concerns I have as a pastor is that sometimes the news that you watch on TV or read affects our love for people. We become hardened in our heart to people groups. And in doing that, compassion does not move. Yet God has compassion upon humanity. God is drawing and wooing humanity to him. And if we say that our God is a God that loves the world, if we say that our God is a God that loves all of humanity, should we not? In fact, in this broken and suffering world and lost world, Jesus embodied compassion, not just as an emotion, but as an active response to the needs of others. How often do we drive by somebody and not even give consideration to them? Not even say a prayer. We're more interested to see what's going on a motor vehicle accident than we are to pray for the people that are in it. How do we know he had compassion? He healed the sick. He comforted the grieving. He fed the hungry. And ultimately, the greatest expression of compassion, he died for you and I. How much compassion do we have is reflective to how much we're allowing God and God's love to flow through our life. As we explore the Bible teaches about compassion. We are invited to reflect on how we can express this divine attribute to one another. Compassion is more than just feeling sympathy. Compassion is love in action. Compassion is causing us to step up to the plate. Compassion is causing our hearts to be broken for one another. Compassion is the active action of love. So how can you and I cultivate compassion in a heart that at times is very hardened by the things that we see out there or by how people treat us? Is there someone in your life that has treated you awful? I can think of a few. How compassionate are you to them when they're going through a time of great need? I know it's difficult. I struggle at times in my own walk with the Lord and being compassionate to people, particularly when those people offend or hurt me over and over and over. But every time I go to want to draw back and withhold the active expression of love, God reminds me of how often I have sinned, and yet He compassionately loves me. So let's look at it from the aspect of Scripture, shall we? Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32 reads, "And be kind and compassionate to one another." What does it say? And be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving one another just as God forgave you in Christ. So let's line this up. If you do not forgive, you will not love. If you will not love, you will not be compassionate. Forgiveness must be a part of our lives. It's forgiveness that allows us to love effectively through the issue and to be compassionate to the person. If we are not forgiving, then we will struggle with loving, which in turn will cause us to be less compassionate. If you're holding on to grudges, if you're holding on to the past, if you're holding on to painful memories, then the person you're looking at is not going to have an opportunity to truly be loved by you or for you to show them compassion. Compassion in the New Testament means to be moved deeply in our inner parts, our inner being. It's often with a sense of mercy and care, such as the Good Samaritan. The Hebrew word for compassion is related to the word for womb, symbolizing a deep parental love and care for a child. So the Greek word means to be moved deeply within our emotions. The Hebrew word is used in the same aspect of parenting a child, that we are compassionate. The biblical examples would be Exodus 16:11-18. Despite the Israelites grumbling, God showed compassion by providing manna and quail, sustaining them daily. His provision demonstrated his mercy and care. During World War II, Corrie ten Boom and her family showed compassion by hiding Jews and Jewish families from the Nazis, risking their own lives. In fact, even when they were caught and sent to a concentration camp, Corrie continued to show compassion, offering hope and forgiveness, even forgiving a former prison guard from the war. Her actions reflected God's love, caring for his people, even in suffering. Even as you are suffering, God is wanting us to be compassionate. In Exodus 34:6, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. God's compassion is linked to his steadfast love. Our compassion is linked to our steadfast love. As we love, we are compassionate. For you who may struggle with compassion, you may ask yourself the question, how well are you allowing the love of God to flow through you? In Lamentations 3:22 and 23, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. It's one of my favorite verses because it tells me that everyone I meet is new every day. My beloved is new every day. My family is new every day. As I forgive, as his mercy and compassion flows through me, and they are new every day, I can look at people that are repeat offenders and I can love them through. One of my stories I love to share is of a veteran who I have seen and medically taken care of for many times through the years. And the first 4 times were not good. He yelled, he screamed, he was abusive verbally, he was threatening as I was providing medical care for him. And then on the 5th time, he looked at me and tears started going down his face as he said, "I've been awful to you, Doc. Please forgive me." Now I will tell you that that veteran comes by every time he's in the hospital. For any reason he's in the hospital, he'll find me to give me a hug. How did that happen? It's not anything great of me. It's the working of Christ through me to forgive. Thus, every time I saw him, to be compassionate. It didn't mean I liked his behavior, but it does mean that I allowed God's love to flow through me, that I would be compassionate to one who had offended me. And now today, that compassion seen by him over and over and over has changed his life. Being compassionate to someone who is hurting will give rich dividends to you. We are compassionate when we see a dog on the side of the road that is hurt. In fact, often we'll show more compassion to an animal than we will to a human being. But God is compassionate to all, and I just read new, meaning every morning, every day they're new. Could we say that for you and I? I don't know. God showed compassion on Nineveh and Jonah, 3:10 through chapter 4, verse 11, where he continued, even though the people were wicked, when they repented, God showed compassion and spared them. When we look at this, we see throughout the Old Testament God's compassion. When they built the golden calf, God's compassion. When they were rebellious, God's compassion. Even when they were in Babylon, God's compassion. He let them back out. God is a compassionate God because God is a loving God. Jesus, Matthew 9:36, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, sheep without a shepherd. Luke 7:13 and 14, when the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched, and they carried him on, and the dead man sat up and began to talk. So compassion, the woman with the issue of blood touched the hem of his garment. Compassion. How? She was healed, but he restored her to her family, to her clan, to her tribe, to her God. We are to show compassion even upon those who hurt us. We are to love even those who hurt us. And it's probably one of the hardest things to do, particularly when it's a subtle, low-grade, constant behavior. But I believe that as we reach out and are compassionate over and over and over, it gives the Father above an opportunity to touch a heart. I like to pray in our ER when I pray during the shifts and the morning huddles, that we would leave an indelible fingerprint upon the hearts of all that we meet, that they would know that they were loved and cared for, that we would show compassion. It's not easy in an emergency department, but it's something that I can tell you that my emergency department and staff have embraced as they reach out, not just because they're in medicine, but because they desire to be merciful and compassionate and loving to those who come into our ERs. Our call. Let's talk about our call. Yours and mine. We know that God was compassionate. We know that Jesus was compassionate. What about you and me? Colossians 3:12 to 14 says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And over all these put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Right there. You and I are to put it on. We're to wear it every day, everywhere we go. In the marketplace, on the road, at your jobs, in your homes. Wherever you may go, we are called as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. Clothe yourself. What's the very first word? Compassion. Being compassionate. And you say to me this morning, Pastor, I used to be very compassionate, but somehow I've lost it. Go before the Lord. Acknowledge the hurt. Acknowledge the disappointment. Acknowledge where people have offended you. Pray that the Lord help you to forgive them. Pray that the Lord give you a heart that is broken for them. There are things that have gone through my life that are traumatic events. Very traumatic. Some that has caused behaviors, dysfunctional behaviors from a childhood or young adulthood of abuse. But I can tell you today that if those people were right here in front of me, I would love them. If you don't deal with the hurt of your heart, you won't be compassionate. Even for those of you who struggle with it, because the way God made you, He still calls you to be compassionate. There is no excuse not to be. We are called to love a world that is lost. We must put aside our bitterness, our resentment, our hurts, our anger to touch a life. That's what God calls us to do. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3 and 4, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us all in our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. In other words, God is there for us. We are to use and do what God has done for us to others. It's not just to be held on to us, it's to be giving out. I mentioned earlier the Good Samaritan demonstrated compassion. How does compassion relate to love? Because they are one. Love is the choice and commitment. Compassion is the action word. Because love is the foundation of compassion. God's love fuels His compassion. Jesus embodied compassionate love. We are called to compassionate love. So, what today causes you to say, I can't be compassionate? So here's some questions that you can take away questions. That's what I call them. Okay? So I'm going to list them out and I'm going to come back to talk a little bit more in my conclusion. Can you recall a time when someone showed you deep compassion? How did it impact you? When have you struggled to be compassionate towards someone else? What made it difficult? Again, when have you struggled to be compassionate and what makes it difficult? Do they have to change for you to be compassionate? How does God's compassion towards you influence the way you show compassion to others? In what areas of your life do you feel called to grow in compassion? What does Jesus' teachings teach us about true compassion? The Bible is the answer. The Bible will set you free. The truth will set you free. If your heart is yearning to be compassionate, if you're struggling and you want to be able to weep before the Lord, break up that fallow ground, that hardened heart, that God's love can flow through it. Break the dams down. Clear it out. Let His living waters flow through you, and you will be compassionate. Why do you think compassion is so often linked to forgiveness? And I think that we've already spoke about that, but that's something you can think about in your heart. What does it mean to clothe yourself with compassion? Does it mean you just do it one time in the day? How can we move beyond simply feeling pity for others to taking compassion, action? Remember, compassion is the action word of love. What barriers prevent people from showing compassion? List them out, write them out. What barriers causes you and I, humanity, not to show compassion? And how can we overcome them? Who in your life right now needs compassion right now in your life? And so often we'll go reach out to the stranger and show compassion, and we forget our own families. We've hardened our heart to cry over their heart. Is it possible to show compassion even when you don't feel it? Good question. I always say this, even if your feelings are not in it, do it. Because as you are faithful to the Lord and obedient to scriptures, God will move within your heart. How do you balance compassion with healthy boundaries? You've got to be wise about this. How does compassion differ from enabling harmful behavior? Because compassion is rooted in agape love. Be wise. Ephesians 4:32. Be, be kind and compassionate to one another. Be kind and compassionate to one another. So let me give you more of a closing example. Mother Teresa spent her life showing compassion to people in India that were not considered lovable. What about you and I? It doesn't mean that we all run to the prisons and the jails to show compassion upon the criminal, although that is important. But I would rather see you, as I said last week, ooze love everywhere you go. I would love to see you ooze compassion, the active verb of love. What about it? Is there someone right now that you can think of that you say there's no way I can show compassion? They've hurt me so greatly. I'm there. I understand that. It took me years in some cases. But as I said earlier, the truth shall set you free. Can you show compassion to your husband or your wife or to your children? Can you stand in the gap for them, looking not to the left or to the right, but believe in God? Leave an indelible fingerprint of love upon their heart, overlooking the multitude of issues and sins? Are you a compassionate person? Or is your heart hardened? As we conclude this study on compassion, we are reminded that compassion is not just an idea or a feeling, it's the active expression of God's love. Where would you and I be if God had no compassion? True compassion moves you and I out of our comfort zones. It challenges us to see others as God sees them. Do you see your neighbor, your family, your friend, co-worker the way God sees them? To respond with kindness, to respond with healing and hope when they are hurting and in pain. Whether through a simple act, a listening ear, or standing with those in need, compassion reflects Christ in us. Compassion moves through us and we act. True compassion, as I said earlier and I've said throughout this Bible study, is more than a feeling. It's acting in love, even through the unlovable. Who in your life do you need to show compassion? Who in my life do I need to show compassion? Or are we like Peter, who said, how often do we have to forgive? And the same answer for that is the same answer I give for the question I just asked. There is no end. We forgive, we love, we show compassion. What about it today? There was a man, a Polish priest, that was imprisoned during World War II in a concentration camp. When the Nazi guards selected a man to die by starvation, he volunteered to take his place. For weeks, he comforted and prayed for his fellow prisoners, showing the same sacrificial love Jesus did. And he died in that camp. How much do we love fellow man is reflected by how much we allow God to love us. There are some people I've met that struggle with love. They struggle with being loved, and they struggle with expressing love. God's compassionate power working in your life will break down every stronghold, every dam that is blocking that love to allow you to be like him. What would the world look like if we, the ecclesia, the called out ones, the church, responded with compassion and wisdom every day? I pray that you have been blessed by this Bible study. Next week it will be on grace. Excuse me. I pray that you walk out the lessons we've already had, that you are forgiving, that you are loving, that you are compassionate, that you are living in him. And if you do all those, then being gracious just will be a part of your life. I want to encourage you today. Reach out today. Touch someone's heart. Bless them. Stand with them. Pray for them. Touch their heart for Jesus. May his peace and blessings be with you. I pray. See you next week.